As I said, it's about Panama leaks, and I want to get on stage Max Hoppenstedt. He's chief editor of Motherboard. Renata Avila, campaign lead at the Web We Want Foundation. And last but not least, Frederik Obermeier, one of the main journalists at SZ dealing with Panama leaks. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I want to say briefly in the very beginning, thank you to Republica for letting us do this panel and squeezing it in on very short notice, as the Panama Papers are actually still pretty current. So thank you to the program team and to everyone, and congrats to a fantastic Republica 10 actually as well. Yeah, with me on stage, Renata and Frederik, and I think everyone is aware what we're actually talking about with the Panama Papers, and we only have 30 minutes, so I want to dive right into asking you about this, and then hopefully we'll have 10 to 15 minutes to take questions from you, the audience. Yeah. So, Frederik, the leak or the publication of the Panama Papers is only 4 or 5 weeks. When you look back at it, and you've been working on it for over a year from what I understand, are you content with the impact? What do you make of the global reactions?
To be honest, I was a little bit surprised by the impact, because as we researched into the data for over a year, it was like at some points we lost the contact to reality in a way, because we always counted, there's this story, who's going to research that, and in the end, it was us speaking about, you do have this head of state, you found that head of state, wow, great. But seeing now what this worldwide investigation led to, that's great, that we see that there's a international debate, a global debate about tax evasion, about this shadow world of offshore. But at the same time, for us it's still important to focus on the running investigations, because I mean we are still digging into the data. I suppose there are still great stories hidden in this treasure trove, and we have to find them. So for us the work goes on.
I think apart from the political ramifications that spilled out in the hours and days afterwards, we had a sort of interesting situation that just hours after the release and the publication, there was a big debate starting on some sort of meta level about the way this should be publicized. So there was a lot of people from, in Germany, Sarah Wagenknecht, to prominent bloggers or yeah, like new journalists that use YouTube, to all sorts of internet commentaries and voices in media, and some media as well, that actually were kind of not happy with the reporting and were complaining that something was hidden from them or held back. And I've just found it astonishing that the same people that would complain about something being hidden from this secret shadow forces or whatever that hide things were complaining about an investigation that actually shed light on one of the biggest secretive world. What did you make of that?
I mean, that was an interesting situation for us as well, because we thought that there may be discussions, but not that fast, because I mean, we thought that people would at first step speak about what's hidden in there and about the revelations, but we recognize now that there was a parallel debate about the way of publication, and I mean that's good. So it's always good to reflect what we have done and if we should change something in the future. But for us, what we have learned about it, that we have to communicate very openly and explain what we have done and why we have done and why we have not done something. So for us that was interesting, but it was a learning process as well.
Renata, your reaction just I think hours after the publication on that Sunday evening of the Panama Papers was, I remember a tweet from you that read something like, full docs or it didn't happen. What did you mean by that, and why would you say that?
My reaction was a mix. I mean, I come from Guatemala, and it is basically Panama is the main place where all the, not even the politicians, but the whole elite of Central America hides their wealth. Central America is one of the regions in the world with the highest inequality, the systemic problems of corruption and so on. So for me, hearing at the Panama Papers, I was super excited, you know, because the whole region is in this process of setting up an anti-corruption institution by the United Nations that has really, like, we have a president in the prison and the vice president in the prison and around 50 top officers in the prison, but somehow the private sector is still quite protected. And we know that the government doesn't act in isolation. They do these kind of dealings. So it was a beacon of hope for the activist citizens engaged in this process in all the countries. So then, when we saw nothing, and we saw that the documents were just glimpses of what was going on, especially in my community of lawyers and human rights lawyers, we are quite familiar with what kind of documents and which kind of information we could find in those papers if we had access to the whole database. Like, for example, dates when coinciding with certain events happening inside the country, matching the travels, the public travels of some public officers with the documents that we have, the fake people that they put and they force to sign the documents, you know, at their offices. How you have to go? There's so many layers of secrecy that having full access, not to the database, it was a way to understand a systemic problem and how to tackle it by dismantling this complex net. So I saw it that we went like 10 steps back, that we went to 2008, 2009 times of journalism, and we perceived, many of people like me perceived that it was journalists not trusting the intelligence and the ability of people to do amazing things for the public good. Like, we are better, kind of, the traditional journalists than you people, even if the dispersed knowledge is superior to the knowledge of a bunch of journalists.
So when you're saying, like, publish the docs, are you calling for a publication to the full public, for example, WikiLeaks style, or are you calling for a publication to certain groups, to lawyers, for example, to deal with these documents, or what would your preference be? You have someone on stage who could maybe do something about it.
Obviously, my preference will be publication, the way that, by the way, journalistic organization, I thought that we had left well behind the debate of whether journalism, WikiLeaks is journalism or is not. I mean, it is, and it wasn't disputed, and was actually, that was one of the points that made me really uncomfortable about the press release. We are journalists, not like WikiLeaks. It was like, what? Anyway, but the way that this organization had handled data, and actually the way that you can play with different releases in the public interest and combine them. I have done it myself with a little documents released so far by Panama Papers, and cross-referencing with cables released by WikiLeaks and documents released by the Global Intelligence Files and other documents. So that's when the situation gets really interesting, because we are talking about situations that are connected with each other, you know, and only this ability to play. I mean, now we have the computing ability to get to arrive to conclusions and to get the bad guys to the place they deserve, like, faster. But with drip drop, we cannot achieve that, and we'll miss a big opportunity.
2016 is actually sees the 10th year since the founding of WikiLeaks, astonishingly enough. And I think we've seen many different ways leaks and whistleblowing can be reported and are reported, and the strategies the way the documents are handled from Cablegate to collateral damage to the Snowden leak and to things like Swiss leaks and stuff that the Rechercheverbund has been working on from NDR and Süddeutsche Zeitung. Frederick, would you say is there a crisis in investigative journalism? Is there a resurrection? Has it always been like this? Is traditional media picking up to outlets like WikiLeaks?
No, I think at the moment we learn that apart from WikiLeaks, who by the way do a great job, and I like the idea of what they're doing, but I think in the last years we have seen alternatives to WikiLeaks, because I mean 10 years ago WikiLeaks had a unique selling point. It was at a time when investigative journalists had to learn their lessons, for example regarding encryption and stuff like that, and WikiLeaks really was great and is great on that point. But now we see that whistleblowers and sources do have the possibility to choose what to do. They can go to WikiLeaks, they can do, I mean, there are heaps of media houses who have encrypted ways of communication or ways of dropping information, or even people that are going to NGOs like Greenpeace and dropping material there. So for a whistleblower, I think it's a great time and great epoch, because they can choose where to go and what fits their needs, and for example what fits their needs of regarding security. Because I mean, I do really to a certain extent I'm with you with the idea that there would be advantages of publishing more data, but at the same time we always have to think about the security of the source, and this source has to be protected. I mean, during these investigations there have been so many people worldwide revealed that may have an interest of doing harm to the source. So for us it's the most important thing at the moment to protect the source, and this has nothing to do with a feeling of superiority. For example, just in these weeks, ICIJ and Süddeutsche Zeitung are thinking about whom to involve in this project, to open it up, because there are many countries in the world that have not really reported to that extent that they should be. But for us, the risk of exposing the source, maybe unintentionally, by putting all of the data into the public, that is too high. And I mean, for us there's a responsibility, because we don't want our whistleblower in prison, or even worse, dead. I mean, we have seen certain whistleblowers that are in prison now, and so I do understand the wish of the source to stay anonymous, and at the same time, or doing so, protecting his life.
Did you want to say?
Well, I just want to respond that the publication of a whole database can be done in a way that it at the same time serves two purposes. I mean, there are ways to actually to not only anonymize the source, but anonymize the range, the periods of time, the first document, last document that might indicate the first login and the last login of the person, if that was the way that it was acquired. But I do agree. I disagree with you. I agree with you in this flourishing of. Maybe I will be really happy the day that WikiLeaks is not needed anymore, you know, and all these brilliant people can move to the next innovative thing. But it is still a need of WikiLeaks, obviously, as we have seen how media is pressured all over the world to censor and protect the powerful, you know. If you look at the recent history, I mean, many media have been in the spotlight at covering up companies, corrupt companies, or covering up powerful people, injunctions and all these kind of mechanisms. But the thing that worries me the most, I mean, you say that you're very concerned with your source, about your source. All media say that they're very concerned about the source. I mean, even The Guardian said that they were very concerned about Snowden at the moment of that release, and there's no institutionalized mechanisms to protect sources. I mean, there's no courageous institutional mechanisms to protect sources. I mean, it took Amnesty International years to include and support Chelsea Manning. It took, I mean, all the human rights organizations froze with Snowden. I mean, that's, actually, I'm part of the advisory board of Courage Foundation. We had to put together this foundation because no one was daring to help him. I mean, now everyone is praising him. You know, at that moment was an absolute paralysis and inability to react and really protect the source. I mean, that's the reality in the West. Imagine in Africa. In Africa and in Latin America, many times it will pay with the life. So I hope that this creates some awareness that we need robust publication as long as we have robust mechanisms to protect sources. A good source protection, like the one that Courage Foundation is trying to set up, will lead to more robust and fearless publication, I think.
Did you want to say something?
I mean, for us, we thought a lot about this topic, and there are several points that were very important for us. We spoke with dozens of experts, IT experts, and experts in this offshore business, and they actually told us you cannot 100% guarantee that if you publish these documents, that there is no hint in there that may lead to the source. And what is more important, or at the same time important for us, is, I mean, the source gave it to us for a journalistic purpose, and the source, as far as we know, is well aware that there exists something like WikiLeaks. So we, to a certain extent, also have to respect what the source has given the material to us, obviously because it wanted to us to work on it and wanted, for example, in this case, I suppose journalists working on this that had experience in that area. I mean, all these documents, they are, it's not like you will have a look at the document and you really understand at first glance what it's in there.
I think we only have 10 minutes left, so I actually want to give everyone in the audience the chance to ask a question. There will be handheld microphones, and I mean, if you don't have a question, I would have some more questions, but I assume there's one back there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. From the UK, you guys managed to force our Prime Minister and the Chancellor to publish their tax returns. But they didn't publish them all, they just published a summary of their tax returns. So thank you. And I understand what you've said about you cannot release WikiLeaks style, and I understand people will be doing their best to track down the source. When is the next release of information? Because in the UK what happened was this hit the press really hard. Suddenly everyone is telling you about their tax returns. We find that certain members of political parties have resigned, certain members of political parties have used tax havens. So then what happened was there was a media cover thing around the opposition party being anti-Semitic, and then that wiped it all out of the headlines. I'd like this to come back. So when would you be releasing your next data? Is it coordinated, or is it just going to happen by bits and pieces, or what?
At the moment, nearly all project partners are still working on the material, and of course we speak about what we found, and we share our findings, and in some cases we decide if some of the media partners want to go on the same day, but there's no rule for that at the moment, so everybody can go for it. If the Guardian finds something in the data, we would expect them to share with all the other partners their findings, but there is no rule that they have to stick to a certain publication date, because this first date of publication, that was the 3rd of April, was only important for us to prevent all of the partners to get into a certain race of scoops, because we wanted to work in a big group cooperatively and without the fear that one of the partners may go or may publish first. So that's the reason why we agreed on a date to go out together, to prevent this run. But I know, for example, from The Guardian that they are working on many stories. At Süddeutsche Zeitung, we are also working on dozens of stories at the moment that are based on the Panama Papers. And there will be articles published in the next days and weeks. But there's no fixed date where we can say, okay, on July the 1st, there will this be out. There's nothing like that.
There's a question over here.
Hi. I would like to ask Renata, actually, what would you say should be the role of mainstream journalism, so to say? Because for sure you need mainstream media to report about these issues, but then you always have this problem that was pretty obvious here. The journalists, of course, like to kind of protect their profession, so they will never publish everything because then their job would be kind of superfluous. But what would you imagine? What could be the ideal role of journalists in, yeah?
I mean, not being a journalist myself, what I can see is, I see a superior value, and it is the value of the right to know of the people, and that is the value that's the fundamental value that, together with the freedom of the press, should be exercised. We are seeing with this release, for example, 99%, even more than 99% of the information that will never be published somehow. Or it's unclear. There's no guarantees that this information will be published. So the role of and in some of the countries there's not even a partner. If I think of my country, Guatemala, we might never hear about this. And so it is a balance. It is protecting the source, exclusivity of the news outlets, the economy of the news. And the really flawed model on how journalism gets funded. And at the same time, the right to know of the people globally, on a truth that only 400 journalists have access to, and that they can decide with a bias and a specific agenda what to do with them. I think that the role of the media more and more will radically change in the near future because it is not exempted from the institutional crisis that all our current institutions are facing. I mean, there's corruption, there's bribes, there's lots of censorship, self-censorship. There's, as we have seen in Brazil, there's even the ability of corrupt media to deeply harm democracy. So I think that the role of mainstream media right now is to examine itself, reinvent itself, and challenge the limits, not impose themselves even more constraints than the constraints that they already have, and be supportive of each other instead of embracing the culture of secrecy that is what we are fighting against.
I wanted to ask you another question, actually, Frederick. When we look at the sentiment of criticism against media and against, I mean, interestingly enough, the release of the Panama Papers comes at a time where there's a lack of trust into media organizations, or dwindling trust that's most prominently associated with this kind of horrible term, Lügenpresse in Deutschland, in Germany. And also there's the funding crisis, which is another thing. And would you say the way that the ICIJ and your organization approached this leak was actually trying to combat that and putting it on different shoulders and stuff? How do you see the role of investigative journalism actually in the debate around dwindling trust in media organizations?
I mean, we learned in the last years that it's being more and more important to explain what we do. For example, I mean, we already tried. For us, it was little steps, what we have done now, and have done Facebook Live sessions, Reddit sessions. We wrote hundreds of emails to readers explaining stuff, going to conferences like this. And I think, for example, if I think about Reddit, we wouldn't have done that 2 years ago. But it was important to explain our work and to explain our readers why we have chosen, for example, not to publish everything and why this protection of the source is so important for us. And at the same time, we can learn of these discussions. For example, one lesson we learned is that in these days we are trying to publish more data on the stories we already released. It's like we already did it, publish documents regarding these stories, but we will do more on that. But it takes some time, and for us it was at the same time we had to explain our readers that we think that it's very important to address their questions, but at the same time it's also important that we can go on with our work. It's like digging into something. So that's something where we had to find the balance. I don't know if we have found it, but I do understand readers that want answers, but we also have to ask them for some time, and we will try to answer as much questions as possible, but at the same time we want to do our work, and the work is at the first hand investigative journalism. So that's a way of finding the balance. But I mean, obviously it's very important to address questions like that, and rebuilding the trust in conventional media. Yeah.
I think we have time for one last question, and whoever that person is, I would just ask you politely to be really brief, because we're running out of time and there's more great panels. But yeah.
Very short. When we look at what I want to go on the lessons learned, that means there is a structural corruption. When I look at Germany, I can't get the information of the companies who owned by who. That means I have to pay, I think, €3 or €4 to get this company registrations. When I look to other countries, I don't get the information at all. In UK, there is open corporates, but as I look at the tax havens, this information, I think it's not available. So I think we should learn the lesson to publish all this information. And for example, there are so many companies in UK who are houses who are bought by foreign countries, other countries too. So I should just say it's not possible that a corporation in Panama can buy a house in UK. What's about this lesson we have to learn?
I mean, from a German perspective regarding such data that has been leaked to us, we have a certain restriction that we cannot publish everything because there are restrictions due to the German Pressegesetz. So we are only allowed to publish things that are of public interest and stuff like that. But what the ICIJ is doing next week is they actually are going to release a database with the kind of metadata of the Panama Papers. And that is, for example, information that can be found in some countries in the company registry, but in some countries not. So there is this first step of building up a database without losing the possibility to protect the source, because it will be the metadata, and I think it's important because it will be an important tool for investigators, for NGOs, for lawyers. But still, we couldn't do it due to German law, but ICIJ is doing it, and I personally think it's a good idea. But they also will not be able to release the original documents, because there, again, we are at the point of protection of the source. Yeah. And I hope that, I mean, for us, we do that. I mean, for me, it's like 2 hearts beating in my body, because I do understand that people would like to see all the original documents, but for me, it would be personally, it would be a catastrophe if we release something that may lead to the exposure of the source, and in the worst case, even to some harm to the source. So for me, it's hard, but for me, the life of the source is more important.
For me, it's really, really hard to trust 400 media outlets having access to these kind of documents, and then claim that what you are trying to do is to protect the source. I mean, it is hard to believe. It is hard to believe that it will be a perfect circle of trust of 400 journalists working on this. It's really hard, because I have experienced the flawed, even unintentionally, even small negligence, one mistake, you know. So I do not take that argument of source protection, but regardless, I think that one of the very important tools that journalists need is open data about corporations. And that's key, and that's a fight that citizens can help to, and pushing for the release of that key public, key data that should be public and that should be free, as in free beer. I mean, journalists in Guatemala were trying to access the corporate databases. It was so expensive that the limited budget that they already have for the few little investigative journalism that takes place there, they couldn't afford. I mean, it is unacceptable that journalists have to pay for information that should be in the public domain. We need more information. We need more data that we can cross-reference, and I think that is one important lesson. And the second important lesson, we need, as I said again, support Courage Foundation and invite the creation of similar foundations everywhere to protect sources.
Thank you, Renata. Thank you, Frederick. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Unfortunately, we have to finish the discussion now as the next panel is coming up, but I guess from what I understand, there will be more publications, there will be more debates around that. You can see our Twitter handles there. Tweet at us. We can debate on Twitter. We can debate here at Republica. And yeah, thank you for being here. Thanks to both of you. Thank you.
Dank für die Einladung.